Hello F11 members and welcome to issue 27, April 2014's issue and the fundamentals of post-production video tutorials. I'd like to take you this morning to Iguazu Falls in Argentina and talk to you through how I processed this picture. Here on the left we have the raw image straight out of the camera, untouched. Here on the left, the end product, and I'm going to talk to you through we get from this to this. So here in Lightroom I have the unedited images, the raws, straight out of the camera, and I've been through them and I've looked at them, and this sequence here looks to have the most potential. Particularly because there's some good stuff going on in the sky. If I just go full frame, you'll see what I mean. I quite like the sky there. But on this particular shoot, I had to do without my grad filters because they'd been relieved of me on Cabana Beach back in Rio de Janeiro a few days previously. You should have read all about that in last month's Behind the Lens feature. So I had to work with exposure merging to expose for that sky there, and this exposure here for the landscape, and I'm gonna put them together. But this is quite a complex post-production job, this one, because not only are we exposure merging, I want to really accentuate everything that's in the frame in terms of tonal quality, just to bring out the best in the picture. Plus there's a little bit of detail here down in the foreground which is really distracting. I was really quite limited with my viewpoint. I'm sure as you can imagine I couldn't get down there on the lip of the gorge with some shears to get rid of those distracting bits of vegetation. So going to be dealing with them and just generally bringing out the best of this particular picture. So I've chosen this frame to work on as the basis for all that I'm going to do. The reason being, if I look at the histogram, there is a good range of tones and information, with the exception of the sky. If you see up here, if I hover my cursor over the right hand highlight indicator, it's telling me that I've burnt out detail in the sky. I know that. I'm not concerned with that because I'm going to deal with exposure merging, taking the sky from this particular frame. So if I go back to this one here, ignoring the sky, everywhere else there's a good range of highlight and shadow detail. So let's start working through the post-production on the raw conversion stage of this particular raw file. I have of course taken the appropriate caption information and metadata information is all there, my copyright information, Iguazu Falls at dawn, Argentina, there. So now let's develop it. So if I go to the develop mode, and the first thing I do as usual is I'm going to look at the black point here, and you can see the black point, the darkest tone in the frame, is not a black, it's a sort of a muddy grey, so I'm going to adjust the black point. But before I go any further now, let's just think through what we're going to do. I think it's important to really decide beforehand how you're going to tackle the post-production on a picture before just wading in. A sort of ordered, structured way of working is so useful. The first thing to ascertain is that I am going to make various different conversions of this image, one for the shadow regions, one for the midtones, and one for the highlights, to be put together later in Photoshop, and then a fourth frame, this one here, for the sky, So we'll be merging 4 exposures here. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I've adjusted the black point. So now I'm going to look at the point curve here. And I'm looking just really at this right hand part of the image where the darkest tones are. There's some beautiful tones in the water here as the waterfall comes over the edge there. And I want to hold a bit, some decent information here in the darkest part of the image. So I'm just going to adjust the point curve. I'd say this area is bright enough. I don't want to brighten it or lighten it. I'm just going to put a touch of contrast in, just a touch, by altering the shape of that curve there. Just the merest touch there. Okay, I'm just going to put a little bit of vibrance in, a little bit of subtlety there, just to boost the colors a touch. And I'm going to go to Sharpen Scenic to adjust the sharpening now, using the Lightroom preset, which I find so useful, and then just fine-tune the masking. So by holding down Alt and sliding this masking slider over until the black points are covering the areas of the image where there is no detail, essentially the sky and a little bit of this area of the waterfall there. So masking is around about plus 17. I'm going to come back just a touch on that to about 11. Okay. So that's sharpening done, and now I can export this because I'm essentially ready to put this. That's the first bit, thinking in terms of just the area on the right, the darker images. So I'll go and export that. Okay, next thing to do is think in terms of now the midtones in the image. So if I come back up to develop mode and come back up to the point curve, I'm now going to readjust this for these sort of middle tones in the image around the middle of the area really. And I'm just going to put a very shallow curve, darkening things down a touch, a little, just the merest S of a shape for a touch of contrast in there. You can be so subtle with this. I think that's probably about right. And that's it. I'll now export that. That's my second export, and that's the midtones, the exposure for the midtones done. Bear in mind we're working from the same raw image here again. Now I go back into develop mode and I want to do the third. Just let me pause just a second there if you would. So what I do now is the third conversion for the highlight areas. So what I do again is come back to the point curve. I've reset it to linear and I'm just going to drag it down, and I'm looking at the brightest areas of the picture, not the sky, because we're going to use a separate exposure for that, but these areas up here and this area down here where there's some lovely tone to be had. So I'm going to pull the point curve quite a way down here, and also come back up here and just pull the highlights in. Come back on the highlights to bring in some of the detail, darken down some of that highlight detail. That's a bit too far. I'm going to go to there, -38 on the highlights. Again, library export, and that's my third one. And now if I come back to this one, let's just reset this, and I now want to export this image. I want to think just in terms of the sky for this. I really don't need to do much to this at all. I don't need to add any sharpening. There's a touch put in already, as you can see down here, because it's an area of essentially even tone, so sharpening will be unapplicable. So I'll just put a bit of masking in, the same amount I did on the other one, and come up here and just brighten that sky area just a touch, and a little bit of contrast there, and maybe, no, I won't go on the vibrance, we'll keep things subtle. Okay, that's about it. So I'm gonna go library, export, and those are my 4 conversions. That's all been relatively straightforward, but again, it's always so crucial to think through what you're going to do beforehand. So now I'm going to open them up on Photoshop and we'll consider how we go from here. So I've now got the 4 images open here in Photoshop, and you can see these are the 3 brightest and the darkest one there. So what I'm going to do is basically start with the lightest one and lay layers of the darker ones on top. So let's take, first of all, the second conversion, slightly darker, the mid-tone conversion, and we're going to lay it on top of the base layer. So what I do, and I showed you before how I have actions to help me do things that I often do a lot, and I've got an action here called layer mask, and this one is essentially a very easy action, and it says set selection, cut and close. All it does is select all of the image area and then copy it and then close the image. So I'm going to play that. Okay, so that's now selected the image and closed it, and here I have the lightest image, and I'm just going to paste that selection on top of it by going Control V. Okay, now what I do is let's just put that away for a minute and bring in, I'm going to use the lasso tool here, and I'm just going to select the area of the image that I want to see, and it's this area here, isn't it, on the right. So what I want is for the mask to reveal this area beneath. So now I have another, if I actually just go select inverse, and now if I go feather and mask, this is another action. So what it's going to do is apply a mask so that this area here is masked, so I see the brighter area coming through. If I play that now, it's also going to feather that selection across that line there. So if I play that now, there you can see what we have. If I bring in the layers tools here, what I've got now, let's switch that on off, the brightest layer beneath the background layer, and on top I have this layer here, which is the midtones layer, and there's a mask applied to that, so that this area on the right of the midtone layer is masked, revealing behind the bright part of the right hand side image of the background layer, the bit that we want to see. Okay, so next thing to do is to put the third one on, and if I come to here, this is the area that I want to use as the sort of mid-tone lines, or the highlights, not the sky but the highlight areas of this particular frame here. So what I'm going to do again, bringing my actions palette over here, is select all, cut and close. So I play that selection. I'm now just going to paste that on top. There you have it. Now I have to think what bits of this picture, of this particular frame, I want to see. And it's the brighter bits. So I'm going to use again the lasso tool. Let's take that away here to select an area, well, round about here. Now bear in mind I can always fine tune this subsequently. I'm also going to select a little bit of the area down here where there's just such beautiful tones in that rushing water. Okay, and now if I play that same action, feather and mask, what it's going to do is mask this area of the image so that only these bits I've selected will be visible. Play that selection, and there, we're getting there. We now have 3 layers. The background layer, I'll just knock them off, the background layer, the midtone layer with mask applied, and the highlight layer with mask applied. And here you can see the masks. Bear in mind we can fine tune and refine those masks, and we will be doing that shortly. What I'd like to do now is bring the final layer in, and that's the sky. So there again, I play my action, select all, cut and close. It's selected all of it, close the image. I now paste it on top, and there it is. It's there as a layer on the top, but yet with no mask yet applied. So I select the area of the image, of this layer, of this darkest layer that I want to see, and again I'm going to use the lasso tool to do that, and it's the sky, and that's all. So I'm just going to select that and feather that mask. Sorry, it's not yet a mask. Feather that selection with a radius of 250 pixels. This is all built into my action here, by the way. So I play that, and there you go. We're getting there. I can put that action away, and what we have now is 4 layers. The layer for the sky, the layer for the midtones, the layer for the highlights in the landscape, the layer for the midtones in the landscape, and the layer for the shadows in the landscape. And I'm now going to start fine-tuning and refining those layers. But we'll continue that in part 2.